Leadership is not about the title on your door. Educating for Values-Driven Leadership reveals what it is about. We will focus on what it says about values and business. Stay with me, the best part is near the end. Chapter 1: Values and Ethics. Giving voice to values and ethics across the curriculum at the United States Air Force Academy. Claudia J. Ferrante, Patrick E. Heflin, and David A. Levy. Notes. References Index. Chapter 2: Values and Business. Educating for Values-Driven Leadership. Giving voice to values across the curriculum. Mary C. Gentile. Traditional approaches to education for values-driven leadership in management education have lacked an emphasis on actual rehearsal, the preparation for action that builds confidence as well as competence. Giving voice to values is an innovative pedagogy and curriculum that addresses this gap. Its focus is on literal prescripting and action planning, and it was developed to directly address the challenges faced by educators in the core business functions when they consider ways to integrate discussions of values into their curriculum. Its rapid adoption, across business functions and around the world and in businesses as well as educational settings, demonstrates its usefulness. Leadership, values, ethics, business ethics, giving voice to values, pedagogy, curriculum, management education, business education. Author biography. Mary C. Gentile, Ph.D., is Director of Giving Voice to Values, www.givingvoicetovalues.org, launched with the Aspen Institute and Yale School of Management, now based at and funded by Babson College. This pioneering curriculum for values-driven leadership has hundreds of pilot sites globally and has been featured in Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, Stanford Social Innovation Review, McKinsey Quarterly, etc. Gentile, Senior Research Scholar at Babson College and Educational Consultant, was previously faculty and administrator at Harvard Business School for 10 years. She holds a BA from the College of William and Mary and Ph.D. from State University of New York Buffalo. Gentile's publications include Giving Voice to Values, How to Speak Your Mind When You Know What's Right, Yale University Press, Summer 2010, www.marygentile.com, Can Ethics Be Taught? Perspectives, Challenges, and Approaches at Harvard Business School, with Thomas Piper and Sharon Parks, Differences That Work, Organizational Excellence Through Diversity, Managerial Excellence Through Diversity, Text and Cases, as well as cases and articles in Academy of Management Learning and Education, Harvard Business Review, Risk Management, CFO, BizEd, Strategy Plus Business, etc. Gentile was content expert for the award-winning CD-ROM, Managing Across Differences. Origins and rationale behind the Giving Voice to Values approach. Increasingly values-driven leadership. The aspiration, the competency, and the commitment has become an explicit objective for business educators and business practitioners alike. The prevailing wisdom is that organizations that want to ensure ethical decision-making and behavior in the workplace will do better by appealing to employee values and by affirming positive organizational goals, than by focusing exclusively or even primarily on a rules and compliance orientation. Business and educational thoughts leaders from Jim Collins to Lynn Sharp Payne have made this point, and the emphasis on leadership curriculum in management education is a reflection of this shift. Ethics education in business schools, however, although also receiving an increasing amount of attention, often not so positive from the management education accrediting bodies, from the business press and, accordingly, from business school deans, has not always reflected the power of this aspiration and competency-based orientation. In fact, Business ethics education has too often remained the realm of thou shalt not rather than appealing to a sense of purpose and building a skill-based confidence and moral competence. For business students and practitioners, ethics education's emphasis on action constraints is not very appealing. These are the sorts of people who are motivated by the desire for achievement and accomplishment. They want to build enterprises, to create new products and services, to reach new markets and, of course, to make money. Accordingly, to make education for ethics and values compelling and useful for this audience, it becomes important to link it to action, effective, impactful action. Instead of focusing on what we cannot do, it becomes important to ask and answer the questions: how can we act on our values? How can we build our business based on values? How can we be effective as well as ethical? Giving Voice to Values 1, GVV, an innovative pedagogy and curriculum, launched by the Aspen Institute Business and Society program as incubator and, along with Yale School of Management, founding partner, and now based and supported at Babson College, is crafted as a response to just these questions. GVV identifies the many ways that individuals can and do voice their values in the workplace and provides opportunities to build the muscles necessary to do so. GVV grew out of two recognitions: first, that increasingly research from a variety of different disciplines, social psychology, cognitive neurosciences, even kinesthetics, suggested that an effective way to influence behavioral choices was through rehearsal literal practice. And second, that traditional approaches to ethics and values education tended to focus on building awareness and teaching analysis, both cognitive skills, to the exclusion of this same rehearsal and its focus on action. It is not that awareness, so we can recognize ethical challenges we encounter them, and analysis, so we can discipline our reasoning about those same challenges, in order to identify the right course of action, are not important and necessary. They unquestionably are essential. It is rather that they are not sufficient, and in many ways, the emphasis on action as outlined in the GVV pedagogy is a better fit with the other, non-ethics courses across the business curriculum. These core recognitions formed the basis for the GVV pedagogy. A new type of case exercise was developed with several distinguishing features. The cases are typically brief and therefore easy for faculty across the curriculum to fit them into their syllabi and to assign them as group exercises for students. They feature managers at all levels of the organization, from new managers just out of school, to mid-level managers, all the way through to senior and C-suite executives. In this way, the cases are adaptable for undergraduate, graduate, and executive education purposes, reflecting the fact that students will be encountering and responding to values conflicts right from the start. The cases are based on real situations, although almost always disguised, and as often as possible feature examples of occasions when the case protagonist was, in fact, able to positively resolve the challenge presented. Most importantly and distinctively, however, these GVV cases conclude at a point where their protagonist has already decided what he or she believes the right thing to do is, and the question becomes, how can they get it done effectively? In this way, the students work individually and in teams to investigate, research, craft, and present the best and most feasible literal script and action plan for enacting the protagonist's values-based position. When the students share their best solutions to the case challenge, their classmates are invited to engage in a peer coaching dialogue where the focus is not on a simple critique of their colleagues' solutions but rather on collaborating to enhance and improve them. In this way, the students are invited into what is called the GVV thought experiment. Rather than being presented with an ethical challenge and asked, "What would you do?" a question that can invite easy or naive posturing or skeptical resistance, instead they are presented with a values-driven position and asked how they might successfully enact it. In this way, when they do actually face this decision, they can see that they actually have a choice. They have strategies, tactics, exemplars, and scripts for approaching it. They still do, in fact, have to make that choice, but the GVV curriculum has prepared them to have actual options. There are no easy assurances, but rather a recognition that we are all more likely to do things that we have seen work before or that we have practiced ourselves, preferably in tandem with our peers. The students are not asked to commit to something that they do not, in their heart of hearts, think is possible. Instead, they are enabled to build approaches they can believe in. Other features of the curriculum that prepare students to engage in these scripting, action planning, and peer coaching exercises include an emphasis on self-assessment so that they can play to their strengths when it comes to selecting an effective communication style or problem framing, an introduction to research on cognitive biases and decision-making biases and how they might be used to reframe choices and craft effective arguments, and the opportunity to identify and practice responses to some of the most frequently heard arguments for not acting on one's values, the reasons and rationalizations in GVV parlance. All of these features are explained and illustrated in detail in the curricular materials. 2. How giving voice to values is used in business education now. Of course, to make this educational shift, faculty members hold the key. And while the GVV curriculum and pedagogy were created as a response to the insight that education for action is a critical part of values-driven leadership development, it was also designed with an eye to the specific concerns that faculty often hold when it comes to business ethics education. The integration of values and ethics education across the business curriculum has long been a holy grail for those who endeavor to promote this sort of leadership development. This is not to say that standalone ethics courses are not important and necessary, both as opportunities to dive deep into the insights of those who specialize in this arena and as opportunities to serve as curriculum development engines to create and pilot test new materials that can work their way out into the other disciplines. They are. It is simply to say that the answer to the ages-old debate around integration of ethics versus standalone courses is yes and yes. That is, without also integrating these issues into the other courses, they are often marginalized at best, or even discredited at worst in the rest of the core curriculum. However, although we have yet to meet a professor of finance or accounting or operations management who did not want his or her students to become responsible and ethical managers, these same faculty members often have several strong objections to the integration of explicit discussions of ethics and values into their courses. They do not want to raise issues for which they feel they are unprepared. I am trained as an economist, not an ethicist. They don't want to appear to be preaching to their students, and they don't want to seem naive. They don't want to be in the uncomfortable position of advocating a position that they are not sure is feasible. After all, these educators know that their students are likely to encounter very real and strong pressures to violate their own ethics at some points in their careers. Additionally, their syllabi are already very full with the skills and concepts that are central to their respective disciplines: accounting, marketing, etc., and it is hard to justify inserting time for discussions that very often lead to no specific conclusion or takeaways, as far as the professors and students can see. These reasonable and legitimate faculty concerns have been key drivers in the design of the GVV curriculum. First of all, the curriculum is post-decision-making, as Carolyn Wu, former business school dean at University of Notre Dame, observed. That is, the cases feature protagonists who have already identified what they believe the right thing to do would be, and the questions become, how can they get it done, effectively and efficiently? What do they need to say, to whom, and in what sequence? What will the objections or pushback be, and, then, what would they say next? What data and examples do they need? And so on. In this way, faculty do not need to be in the position to be arguing with students about whether they should or whether they can act on their values in the workplace. Instead, the focus shifts to the question of how they could do so successfully. Similarly, GVV builds on the expertise and the teaching objectives of the business discipline-based faculty because students are not using the language and the tools of philosophy to create their scripts and action plans, but rather the language and the analytical frameworks of the functional area that is relevant to the issue at hand and the course where it is raised. So if the course is managerial accounting and the case is about a CFO pressured to cook the books, the scripts and action plans will be about calculating and communicating the internal and external costs of this practice, not only the cost of detection, but also the cost of distorted information inside the firm, for example. Thus, the very foundation of the GVV pedagogy and curriculum, that is, an emphasis on asking how to act ethically, rather than why or even if one can do so by definition and design, serves as a sort of pedagogical sleight of hand, enabling the faculty across the business core to include values-driven leadership issues in their syllabi more comfortably, more effectively, and even more appropriately than in the past. Additionally, GVV curriculum is designed flexibly so that it can be adopted easily by the individual faculty member in an accounting or a marketing course who wants to find a way to do so, or, alternatively, it can be orchestrated across the entire curriculum at those schools where faculty and deans have decided to take a more systematic approach to the integration of values and ethics. In the former case, the individual faculty member can simply access the hundreds of pages of short cases and readings and exercises, all available for free download at www.givingvoicetovalues.org. The annotated table of contents for the curriculum identifies the materials that can work in each of the various business courses, whether that may be economics or organizational behavior. And there is another website, available on request to faculty only, which includes teaching notes and B-cases as well. If, however, a school's faculty and deans wish to use GVV more systematically in order to integrate values across the entire curriculum, it is helpful to sequence the building blocks of this approach: foundational exercises, a tale of two stories, starting assumptions for GVV personal professional profiles, the scripting and action planning tools, and the scenario-based rehearsals in different functional classes across the core courses. Finally, some faculty have piloted a dedicated elective or core course that introduces students to the GVV pedagogy and even engages them in generating their own GVV-style cases and case solutions. An essay describing all of these approaches, how business schools and faculty can use the Giving Voice to Values curriculum, is available on the curriculum website, and individualized guidance is available from the program director. The purpose of this book, GVV, was developed with the twin objectives of creating an effective approach to building the capacity for values-driven action in business students and practitioners, and also of structuring the curriculum in a way that would be useful and appealing to faculty across the curriculum. This book is intended as an opportunity to explicitly further the second of these goals. Individual faculty members from across the business curriculum have been invited to write chapters describing how they have begun to pilot and adapt the GVV pedagogy in their own teaching. The hope is that the professor of economics or of accounting or of public administration or of marketing and so on will not only find ideas and encouragement in the chapter written by one of his or her peers, but also will be intrigued enough to read and learn from the other chapters where faculty across the disciplines share their experiences and their learnings with this new pedagogy. Readers will find that some of the GVV exercises and cases can work well in multiple disciplines. This whole system seems wrong, Felipe Montes and concerns about the global supply chain, while others are more tailored for a particular function. They will also see that much of GVV is counter to our habitual assumptions about how to think about and teach ethics. This is both a reason for the efficacy and appeal of the approach, and an occasional challenge. For example, some faculty members have encountered initial cynicism when introducing the GVV materials, particularly when working with practitioners. However, in our experience, this cynicism often abates once the concept of the GVV thought experiment is presented, explaining that no one is being asked to commit to a particular course of action but rather to work hard and rigorously and collectively to develop a plan that they could, in fact, find feasible. The cynicism is often born from the assumption that no one else cares about these values or that they are just not possible. The sharing of positive examples of individuals who have, in fact, found ways to enact their ethics, and providing opportunities for students, with their peers, to try on the idea that this sort of action is possible, can enable them to begin to pursue their values without feeling naive or vulnerable. Another way that traditional approaches to ethics education can be confounded by GVV is in relation to the use of role-playing. Often when role-playing is used in an ethics discussion, it is set up as an adversarial exchange. One student plays the role of the person who is concerned about the infraction and another plays the manager who is pressuring their report to oversell the product's capabilities, or to distort the quarterly earnings statement, for example. The problem with this sort of adversarial role-play is that we are all more easily able to generate the arguments for the unethical choice. We have grown up with these reasons and rationalizations, and it can be kind of fun to play the villain. To effectively counter these arguments, and to not feel naive while doing so, students need to spend the time that the GVV scripting and action planning requires of them. They need to work together to research and refine their approaches, to figure out what is at stake for all involved, where the levers of influence may lie, how they might reframe the choice so as to neutralize the objections, and even what sort of approach, individual or collective, private or public, oral or written, quantitative or qualitative, will be most effective with one's particular target audience. For all these reasons, the GVV scripting, action planning, and peer coaching exercise is not the typical adversarial role play. Rather, all the students are on the same side, working together to try to come up with the most effective and feasible approach. This is not to say that traditional role plays cannot be useful in some contexts, but they run the risk of asking students to rehearse the very behaviors we are trying to discourage. And most importantly, it is helpful to recognize that ethics education is developmental and it is important to build the moral muscle memory via rehearsal and peer coaching before moving to the adversarial exchange. Finally, one more way that GVV runs counter to traditional approaches to ethics education centers on the types of decisions the curriculum features. Often educators and students and practitioners alike will argue that the so-called easy or clear-cut ethical conflicts are not a problem, but that it is the gray issue, the time when things are neither clearly right nor clearly wrong, that is truly difficult. And, therefore, they argue, ethics education should ignore the easy questions and focus on these ambiguous decisions. With GVV, we take a different stance. We acknowledge that, of course, there are many of these thorny ethical choices where the right path is not evident. These are the true ethical dilemmas, and they are important. But we argue that these gray issues are actually often instances where reasonable people of goodwill and intelligence can legitimately disagree. That's why they are gray. And, in contrast, just because an issue is clear-cut, it does not mean that it is easy to act on it. In fact, many of the ethical violations that have led to growing distrust of the business sector were occasions when the action in question was indeed clearly over the line, in the realm of illegality and fraud. And, in many of those instances, we learn of employees who were, in fact, aware of what was going on and were not happy about it, but who did not feel they had any options. So GVV focuses on those issues, the so-called clear-cut issues, and asks how could we act on our values in those situations? Rather than getting lost in an endless and answerless debate over the gray issues, GVV provides the opportunity to focus on actual arguments and tactics for the times when the right choice is perhaps more evident but no less challenging to enact. Giving voice to values has spread rapidly across the globe, with hundreds of pilots reaching thousands of students and business practitioners on all 7 continents. Increasingly, major corporations are applying this approach to their own internal ethics, values, and leadership programming as well. None of this would have been possible without the commitment and willingness of individual faculty, such as the authors featured in this volume, to engage in this experiment. In fact, these faculty, especially these authors, are the ambassadors of an emerging movement. Together they are part of an effort that holds the promise to transform the foundational assumptions on which the teaching of business ethics is based, and importantly, to equip future business leaders to not only know what is right but also how to make it happen. Chapter 3: Prices and Price. Giving Voice to Values in the Economics Classroom. Daniel G. Arce. This chapter demonstrates the use of giving voice to values, GVV, within the context of real-world issues commonly found in the economics curriculum. It begins with a motivating example to raise ethical awareness when dealing with issues as basic as supply and demand. The use of GVV is then expanded upon through an illustrative case centered on the comparative statics of market equilibrium subsequent to a natural disaster, as applied to Waffle House's post-disaster menu/pricing policies. The chapter concludes with a discussion on how to facilitate the use of GVV with economics students who may be initially circumspect about the integration of ethics within an economics course. Giving Voice to Values, Economics, Supply and Demand, Natural Disasters, Waffle House. Author biography. Daniel G. Arce M. is professor of economics at the University of Texas Dallas, where he is also the program head. He holds a Ph.D. in economics from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and has published over 50 articles on business ethics, collective action, game theory, counter-terrorism, and Latin American economies. He has received 2 Fulbright grants for study and research in Latin America. Professor Arce is the editor of Defense and Peace Economics, serves on the editorial board of the Southern Economic Journal and the reviewing team for the Teaching Business Ethics section of Journal of Business Ethics. His teaching has been profiled in the Wall Street Journal and his research in The Economist. Introduction and background. The topic of what money should not be allowed to buy falls a bit between the cracks of business school professors, who often hate to raise ethical problems, and economists, who don't always know what ethical problems are. Stanley Hoffman, in Standell, 2005, When I introduce Giving Voice to Values, Hereafter, GVV, I like to begin with the following set of questions, which I have asked students in Principles of Economics, upper-level undergraduate classes on managerial economics, and executives in MBA modules on business economics. In the market for candles, what is the expected effect on the equilibrium price and quantity if there is a decrease in supply and an increase in demand? If the price of paraffin, used to make candles, rises and, at the same time, a candle fad breaks out, what is the expected effect on the equilibrium price and quantity of candles? If a natural disaster, hurricane, tornado, volcanic eruption, flood, earthquake, etc., occurs that knocks out all power and disrupts the local supply chain for candles, what is the expected effect on the equilibrium price and quantity of candles? As supply and demand is the entry into almost any course on microeconomics, it is easy to fit in this set of questions, and thus an introduction to GVV, early on in the semester. 2 points that illustrate the utility of GVV within economics that stem from these questions are as follows. First, from the perspective of the comparative statics of supply and demand, the above questions are equivalent. A decrease in supply and an increase in demand produce an expected increase in the price of candles, with the impact on quantity depending on the relative magnitudes of the decrease in supply and increase in demand. Any price below the market clearing price will create a shortage. Perhaps one can make the case that supply is temporarily, perfectly, price inelastic while demand has substantially increased, the time period is Marshallian one, but price will be expected to increase in any event. Second, in practice the prices of necessary goods usually do not increase in the aftermath of a natural disaster. Indeed, prices often fall even in the face of restricted supply after disasters. This was first shown to be the case for necessary foodstuffs in grocery stores during the recovery after the Alaskan Good Friday earthquake of 1964, Kunruther and Fiore, 1966, Kunruther, 1967, and remains a contemporary phenomenon, as evidenced by regional gasoline prices in Texas after Hurricane Rita in 2005, Nielsen, 2009. Hence, when one hears about price gouging in the aftermath of natural disasters, it is newsworthy because it is so contrary to the norm. This simple set of questions capitalizes on what I have consistently observed as the inability of economics majors to recognize that the ethical context of question 3 above is not the same as that for questions 1 and 2. Indeed, just as the epigraph to this chapter indicates, the loss of ethical awareness in conjunction with education in economics is becoming well documented. Such concerns have been previously raised by Frank, 2004, within the context of the prevalence of non-cooperators among economists in Prisoner's Dilemma experiments as compared to other majors, and by Rubenstein, 2006, in which economics majors and PhD students see the profit-maximizing amount of layoffs during a recession as primarily a technical issue, whereas those with alternative educational backgrounds see the issue of layoffs from a more nuanced perspective. 3. Indeed, over the past decade, my classroom discussion of question 3 with hundreds of economics majors within a liberal arts environment has made it clear that the vast majority of majors initially approach question 3 as being equivalent to questions 1 and 2 until the ethical context is explicitly pointed out. This is entirely consistent with the widespread absence of an ethical perspective in managerial economics textbooks, Arce, 2004. Marwell and Ames, 1981, Miller, 1999, Ferraro et al., 2005, and Malinsky et al., 2012, assert that what the issue is really about is why self-interest takes precedence for economists, but not others, when establishing a pecking order of criteria for evaluating scenarios such as the Prisoner's Dilemma, the ultimatum game, choosing layoffs during a recession, raising prices during a natural disaster, invoking one's own compassion when delivering bad news to others, etc. If training in how to make self-interested decisions explains differences between the economically trained and others in these and other packaged scenarios, and this extends to meaningful differences in the real world, then there may be cause for concern. Within the context of the 3 questions that opened this chapter, reputable firms generally do not raise prices in the immediate aftermath of a natural disaster because much more is at stake than the prospect of short-term profits. Indeed, Waffle House, Walmart, Lowe's, and Home Depot all generate significant goodwill because of the firm's post-disaster solidarity with their local communities. Ergun et al., 2010, Bauerlein, 2011. Some broad guidelines for introducing business ethics into economics and financial economics classrooms are provided by Aragon, 2011, Arce, 2004, 2011, Erickson, 2005, Northrop, 2000, and Welch, 2006. Popular statements exist that are anathema to these attempts, such as Levitt and Dubner S. 2005, p. assertion in Freakonomics that morality, it could be argued, represents the way that people would like the work, whereas economics represents the way it actually does work, emphasis in original. Does this mean that the tools of comparative statistics are what is best put to bear in addressing pricing after a natural disaster? As the evidence suggests that the movement in prices in natural disasters is contrary to what would be indicated by economic analysis, I argue that what is needed is the placement of ethical analysis on the same footing and in the same context as economic analysis. To address concerns about economic education and ethical awareness, students could also be given opportunities to see and discuss scenarios such as Question 3 so that the stakes between economic and ethical perspectives are normalized. Making ethical arguments requires the same sort of practice that makes a student conversant in the tools of economic analysis. This is where Giving Voice to Values, Gentile, 2010, comes in. GVV is a freely available curriculum of cases and scripts that allow students to articulate ethical arguments in familiar economics and business situations. Hence, as GVV falls naturally within the curriculum, it economizes on the scarcity of classroom time. I have found that the GVV case considered in this chapter and others on cases appropriate to an economics classroom on topics such as profit maximization and layoffs, product recall, etc. take up about 30 minutes of classroom time. My usual practice is to cover one case during class so that students get the gist of the approach and assign 3 to 4 cases throughout the semester as group projects. In other words, GVV does not require stepping outside of the normal functioning of the classroom for an ethics break unrelated to the course material. Indeed, it purposefully does not require that non-ethics faculty educate students in the constructs of normative decision-making, although it acknowledges and is complementary to the foundation provided in dedicated ethics courses. Bazerman and Ten Brunsel, 2011, p. contend that GVV can help to create awareness of the ethical dimensions of a situation because the GVV rubric forces those adopting it to identify the major issues involved in a decision in a systematic and comprehensive way. For example, in this chapter, I present a case involving a real-world scenario for pricing in the aftermath of a natural disaster without reference to formal normative ethical theory. In so doing, I illustrate the general applicability of GVV to economic decision-making by examining the potential ethical component of a common business issue, whether or not to raise prices. This chapter illustrates the utility of including GVV cases within the economics curriculum and provides a guideline for doing so. I begin with a GVV case pertaining to Waffle House Restaurant's pricing policy subsequent to natural disasters that builds off the motivating questions in the introduction. In addition to providing brief details pertaining to the protagonist's resolution of the scenario, I provide talking points for the 3 areas of discussion normally addressed in a GVV case: A. What is at stake for the key parties? B. What arguments or rationalizations are the protagonists trying to counter? And C. What levers can the protagonist use in order to influence those with whom he disagrees? This is done in order to better facilitate a discussion of these open-ended questions. In an actual GVV classroom exercise, or group assignment, students are required to generate these arguments and decision reframings themselves. The Waffle House case in class, I begin my introduction to GVV with the supply and demand questions that opened this chapter. As the vast majority of students, no matter whether they are undergraduates or executive MBAs, initially see the three questions as being equivalent, students become somewhat chagrined when I point out that a decision to raise prices during a natural disaster has ethical implications that they may have overlooked. I then briefly discuss some background literature on the relation between an education focused on concepts such as self-interest, rationality, and efficiency and what this does to ethical awareness. Examples of such studies include Frank, 2004, Rubinstein, 2006, Arce and Lee, 2011, and Molesky et al. As a whole, this process provides sufficient prompting for students to be open to considering the ethical dimension to what they might otherwise see as a purely economic problem. I then turn to the following case. Reggie Smith is the manager of a Waffle House restaurant in a region that has recently experienced a local disaster, hurricane, tornado, volcanic eruption, flood, earthquake, etc. Power is out almost everywhere, but he can keep his restaurant open. Due to the emergency generator the restaurant always has on hand to keep the lights on and the ability to switch fuels used to power the grill by means of a several-day supply of gas in tanks. The grill is the only thing that can be used to cook with at the moment. This means a limited menu, constructed by keeping in mind what is easiest to prepare and what people want most. The limited menu decision has far-reaching implications, as FEMA in fact has a Waffle House index to measure the severity of a disaster. According to the index, green corresponds to a full menu, yellow means a limited menu, power from a generator and low food supplies, and red corresponds to a closed restaurant. Reggie knows FEMA will be calling soon. The information he provides will be consistent with yellow. The available items and their normal menu prices are given in table. The limited menu Reggie anticipates volume of more than 2-3 times of what is normal. Moreover, because of the limited menu he is going to have to write the available items and their prices on a blackboard, which means that he can change the prices if he desires. He also has the latitude to change prices, particularly if costs have dramatically changed. He currently has food on hand and Waffle House has a policy of restocking from surrounding restaurants that are outside the disaster area. He does not expect prolonged supply disruptions because his primary supplier also provides food to hospitals. This choice of supplier is by design. At the same time, it is more costly to keep the lights on with a generator and run the grill out of gas tanks. Although it is not mandatory, it is recommended to check with HQ if considering a price change. Reggie is resolute that the prices should not change and should retain their pre-disaster values. With this in mind, I ask students to form groups of 3 to 5 members and answer the following discussion questions in terms of the broader context of not raising prices on necessary goods in the immediate aftermath of a natural disaster. They should write down at least 3 answers to each question. Discussion questions. In this section I present the questions corresponding to the GVV rubric, along with talking points in order to better stimulate conversation. In an actual GVV exercise, students are asked to provide these responses, but I have found that it is helpful to have some answers on hand to further stimulate discussion, particularly for faculty and students who are new to GVV. What is at stake for the key parties, including those with whom Reggie disagrees? It is often helpful to identify all stakeholders in order to fully understand the ethical dimensions of a decision. Stakeholders include customers who need food and could use a return to any degree of normalcy that the Waffle House experience can provide. Identifying with customers allows one to realize that people are more vulnerable when participating in markets than they usually are. Consumers can no longer exit from exchange with reasonable expectations of finding better terms elsewhere or by delaying purchases. In addition, Waffle House itself has several interested parties. Reggie may be putting his job at stake if HQ does not agree with his pricing decision. It is also likely that he lives in the community, so his personal reputation is on the line. Waffle House's local employees could use the paycheck to help finance their disaster recovery. At the same time, these employees may have other disaster-related demands on their time that imply that Waffle House may have a labor supply issue. As for the local franchise, it has to face a public relations issue regarding any pricing decision. Reggie's decision to keep prices as they are is consistent with communicating an ethos of integrity and empathy toward those enduring hardship. Yet the local franchise is going to have to absorb higher costs, and the disaster does not remove its need to make a profit. Finally, Waffle House HQ does not want to be found in violation of price gouging laws, which most states have. One of the benefits of the GVV approach is that it provides an opportunity to share such information, or worse, it does not want to damage the brand's image, either through its pricing or providing a diminished experience owing to the degraded operating environment. Like any firm, Waffle House's reputation can be expressed as a function of the difference between its customers' expectations and their actual experience. Both price increases and service quality must be taken into account when considering the expectation/experience reputational trade-off. Disparate interests are also held by other parties. For example, FEMA needs an accurate report of the circumstances so that it can adequately react to the crisis. FEMA actually does have a Waffle House index that helps to guide the level of assistance that the community will receive. Waffle House's suppliers also have to make their own pricing decisions and may react to price increases by Waffle House with increases of their own. Regulators will be on the lookout for evidence of price gouging. This is a situation that may merit regulation, as asymmetric information exists because sellers have better information about post-disaster supplies than do customers. In addition, Waffle House's competitive environment has changed in that it has more monopoly power. What are the main arguments that Reggie is trying to counter? That is, what are the reasons and rationalizations that he needs to address? This case is tailor-made for the economics classroom because many of the arguments here are familiar to students. For example, arguments to raise prices often echo economic arguments that criticize price gouging laws. Specifically, at a price below the equilibrium level, a shortage will occur. Prices should adjust to reflect the potential for shortages and encourage a market-based resolution of shortages. Not changing prices would prevent the remedy of shortages through the price as rationing mechanism. Even if those who are most willing to pay are income constrained and cannot buy the good at the higher prices, the higher prices still encourage both conservation and out-of-region sellers to bring necessary goods to the affected region. It may be preferred to encourage increased supply by local and national firms through increased prices, because these will be tempered owing to a concern for reputation, rather than consumers having to resolve shortages and risk fraud by dealing with out-of-region fly-by-night sellers who have no reputation whatsoever and may never be seen again. There are also perspectives that are internal to the firm. For example, costs and workloads are higher, so it is reasonable to increase prices. The firm is raising prices to cover costs, not to increase profits. In particular, Reggie's decision to remain open should be subject to the familiar shutdown decision. Given that his average variable costs have increased, prices should cover average variable costs in order to remain open. From a longer-term perspective, one must be concerned that any short-term losses do not damage the long-term viability of the local restaurant. From an anti-regulatory viewpoint, in the absence of shortages, the firm is able to charge what consumers are willing to pay, so why should the case of a disaster be any different? Moreover, Waffle House is not responsible for the natural disaster/disruptive event, hence, it is not like it is exploiting something that is under its control. Non-economic arguments can also be made on behalf of a price increase. Students often come up with a perspective that is consistent with the principle of proportionality. One must balance the potential harm done to the firm of not increasing prices with the harms caused by raising prices. From this perspective, the community will expect and understand a reasonable price increase. Yet, according to the entitlement theory, Kahneman et al., 1986, it is more accepted by consumers to raise prices when the price increase is tied to the costs associated with a particular good or service than if the increased costs are associated with doing business in general. This is particularly true with disaster-related price increases. One can conversely take a cynical stance, arguing that many of these customers will be transient relief workers or evacuees, so there is no need to fear loss of reputation with them. Also, local customers may have their mind on other pressing needs, and so they may not notice or adversely react to price increases. What levers can Reggie use to influence those who disagree with him? It is this question that allows students to exercise their ethics muscle and normalize the stakes with respect to anticipated arguments in the previous subsection. The market-based arguments in the preceding section are consistent with economists' regard for the price system as a superior method for coordinating economic activity. At the same time, students may be surprised to find that a large economics literature exists that supports the holding, or lowering, of prices of necessary goods in the aftermath of a natural disaster. 5 is not raising prices is the observed norm. This is why people are so outraged when prices are raised substantially and such instances become widely known. With respect to the shortage that is expected to be generated at prices that are below their equilibrium level, one can argue that the relevant post-disaster time period for the functioning of market clearing prices is a Marshallian period in the classic sense of Marshall S. 1961, principles. A Marshallian period is one in which supply has become, perfectly, price inelastic at the post-disaster available quantity. Consequently, any increase in price generates profits but it has no reallocation effect. In particular, below equilibrium prices do not produce a shortage, the market will still clear at the lower price as well. From this perspective, the analogy to a binding price ceiling is false. Moreover, to the extent that rationing is needed, the evidence suggests that consumers ration themselves at the non-market clearing price, rather than formal rationing being undertaken by the firm. Self-rationing implies that the demand curve shifts back to the left, a price increase need not be inevitable. In terms of political economy, not raising prices is a marginal contribution toward the maintenance of the societal order, which is an even more valuable public good during times of disaster. That is, raising prices may be the first step toward a breakdown in prosocial behavior, and not raising prices has a measurable marginal value in this instance. Reggie may not want to be the weak link that eliminates the collective good associated with social order. After disasters, the marginal social benefit of not raising prices can outweigh the marginal cost. Related to this is the idea that a disaster lowers the price, opportunity cost, of altruistic behavior, and so more altruistic behavior should occur. Another economic rationale that has been put forth is that not raising prices is a form of social insurance that many firms are willing to supply as part of their social license to operate during normal times. Within this context, one can also consider the impact of a price increase on future revenues. The opportunity costs of not raising prices include foregoing short-term profits, but what are the opportunity costs of raising prices? Waffle House may lose the goodwill of the community if it increases its prices. Home Depot has a policy of price freezes during a declared emergency for precisely such reasons. No price increase will create a locus of loyalty once the crisis is over, but a price increase could have the opposite effect. It might even shift Waffle House's demand curve to the left when normal times return. Solidarity is another reason for not increasing prices. Waffle House can provide empathy and support that boosts the morale of the affected community. Waffle House should not be seen as taking advantage of customers during a natural disaster. Their prices are not only paid by customers, but also they are publicly observable by others and so provide a signal of Waffle House's solidarity with the community. Students are familiar with the Golden Rule, and this can also be used to argue against dramatic price increases. It is exploitative to take advantage of consumers' vulnerability in order to derive disproportionate profits to the firm, even if buyers benefit themselves by having access to the good at a higher price. One must avoid additional unnecessary suffering and taking advantage of those who face unfortunate circumstances. What is your most powerful and persuasive response to the reasons and rationalizations you need to address? To whom should the argument be made? When and in what context? Asking students to produce a more fully articulated argument by elaborating on a single point identified within the previous subsection allows for further development of a values perspective as complementary to the economic context of the Waffle House case. Responses will therefore depend on answers to the preceding questions, and it can be powerful to record them for additional use, both in practice and for future classes. GVV throughout the semester as courses such as Intermediate Microeconomics, Managerial Economics, and Economics for MBAs are primarily driven by problem sets. I augment several problem sets throughout the semester with GVV cases. Students are asked to work in groups and provide 3 to 5 brief and self-explanatory answers each for the stakeholder, rationalizations, and levers questions, and to write up 2 double-spaced pages making their most powerful and persuasive argument. In particular, the profit maximization and layoffs case can be assigned when profit maximization is covered, and the product safety and preemptive recalls for problem sets having to do with public goods or game theory. The case has a game theoretic appendix. Both of these cases contain examples of responses, which can be used to discuss the cases after students have turned their answers in. Given the perceived role of incentive pay in the current financial crisis, I often use the agency and corporate governance case as a capstone exercise. At the time that students turn in the GVV assignment, I usually ask them to bring 2 copies, one to turn in and the other to discuss. Once the problem sets are turned in, I discuss any questions the students may have and then we turn to the GVV case. I first solicit student responses to each question. I then follow up their responses to the question with my own responses, which include those that come with the case and others that I have accumulated over time from past homework assignments. It definitely helps to be prepared with some of your own answers in case you need to break the ice. The discussion and debate that stem from the combined collection of answers is something that students definitely enjoy. More often than not, some students will ask about Milton Friedman's 1970 article, "The Social Responsibility of the Firm is to Increase Profits," and will bring this article up during class discussion. It pays to be familiar with the article and, when the time comes, to point out that once one reads beyond the title of the article, Friedman states that responsibility of corporate executives is to conduct the business in accordance with their desires of owners and employees, which generally will be to make as much money as possible while conforming to the basic rules of the society, both those embodied in law and those embodied in ethical custom. p. 33, emphasis added. In addition, I point out that the former president of the National Association of Business Economists, NABE, Roy E. Moore, 1987, p. 12, asserts that ethics are intertwined with economics in all markets because all markets are composed of transactions that involve implicit as well as explicit agreements and understandings between the parties. I then ask, who better then to understand the trade-offs than an economist? GDV facilitates the articulation of trade-offs that might otherwise be ignored to the detriment of the firm. Conclusion: looking back at a decade often called the noughties because it was bookend with severe economic and financial crises stemming from unprincipled behavior associated with .com/new economy corporations, Enron, Global Crossing, WorldCom, etc., and dubious financial innovations, liar loans, AAA ratings for subprime CMOs, Abacus, etc. One wonders whether an approach to business ethics that is in vivo could make business ethics seem less far afield from business/economic practice than has been the case for business ethics as formal training in normative decision-making. Giving voice to values, GVV, is an example of such an approach. It employs cases that are rooted within economics/business as its point of departure and broadens the perspective by asking students to address three concerns. A. What is at stake for the key parties, including those with whom one disagrees? What are the main, non-ethical, arguments that one is trying to counter? That is, what are the reasons and rationalizations that need to be addressed? And, C. What levers can be used to influence those who disagree with the ethical perspective? The chapter presents a GVV case that can be used in any economics course that covers the comparative statics of market equilibrium, supply and demand, by examining the movement of prices, or lack thereof, of necessary goods in the aftermath of a natural disaster. In particular, it looks at the pricing decisions of Waffle House, a firm that is widely known for its disaster preparedness, so much so that FEMA maintains a Waffle House index. The particular strength of this case is that economic arguments exist that are for and against raising prices, and students can easily place themselves within the situation to make ethical arguments without the need for introducing any formal theories of normative decision-making. As such, I have effectively used this and other GVV cases in economics courses with both undergraduates and executive MBAs. I conclude with a sampling of student reaction given in the course evaluation about the use of 4 GVV cases as group assignments over the course of a semester in an upper-level undergraduate managerial economics course. GVV is another example of how this class emphasizes real-world scenarios. GVV seems to be the perfect way to explore the qualitative side of economics. I have no interest in ethics, to be honest. The cases are interesting and meld theory and the real world well. GVV makes us be more proactive in approaching the course material. GVV is helpful in seeing that the class is more than pure textbook material. Ethics was something that I did not associate with economics prior to GVV. GVV is a necessary part of our learning process that we have not seen before. These comments are representative in that they capture the spectrum and degree to which similar comments were given on my course evaluations. Although it is unlikely that students will unanimously agree on the utility of any one topic within this course, what these comments make clear is that students see GVV as being complementary to economic subject matter and relevant for business decision-making outside of the classroom. Chapter 4: Sustainability and Change. Teaching Change Leadership for Sustainable Business Strategies from the Giving Voice to Values curriculum. Christopher P. Adkins. The shift to sustainable business practices is a change process, requiring individuals who can help reshape both the strategy and the daily decision-making of the organization. The Giving Voice to Values, GVV, program offers an action-based curriculum in which students develop strategies and scripts for sustainability leadership. This chapter discusses the advantages and applications of using GVV in teaching sustainability in business contexts. Specific themes include integrating GVV within a variety of course designs and theoretical frameworks, leading sustainable change by aligning individual and organizational values, fostering a sense of self-efficacy based on past experience and peer coaching, and practical strategies for change agency that address common sustainability challenges. These advantages are illustrated using specific exercises from the GVV curriculum, and supplemented by suggestions for integrating resources from the sustainable business literature. Sustainability, sustainable business, leadership, change management, shared value, self-efficacy, decision-making, curricular integration, peer coaching. Author biography Christopher P. Adkins, Ph.D. is Executive Director of the Undergraduate Business Program at the College of William and Mary, Mason School of Business. His research and teaching integrate insights from cognitive neuroscience, behavioral economics, and social psychology to enhance business decision-making, particularly in the areas of ethics, sustainability, and social entrepreneurship. Current research projects include the role of emotional memory in ethical decision-making, empathic stakeholder analysis for value creation, and the interaction of pro-social and pro-self dispositions and behavior in entrepreneurial settings. In his teaching, Chris has pioneered the application of the MBA-level Giving Voice to Values approach with undergraduates. With sustainability consulting firm Saatchi S., Chris led the first personal sustainability program at a university. He is the co-founder of the Corporate and College Collaborative for Sustainability, a partnership of business leaders, faculty, and students for innovation in sustainability education. Chris holds a Ph.D. and B. from William and Mary, and A.M. from Boston University. Teaching change leadership for sustainable business, strategies from the Giving Voice to Values curriculum in discussing the importance of sustainability for business organizations. The conversation ultimately must address the question of value. How will sustainability create value for the business, for shareholders, and for stakeholders? Fortunately, a range of sustainability models have emerged in management education to answer this question, as well as case studies of organizations who have successfully integrated sustainability to create economic, social, and environmental value. While conceptual knowledge and practical examples are necessary, an essential piece of the puzzle is missing: change leadership for sustainability. In short, the shift to sustainable business is a change process, requiring individuals who can reshape both the strategy and the daily decision-making of the organization. Two approaches to sustainability education may fall short if they do not include the strategies and skills that prepare leaders to address the obstacles likely to arise in integrating sustainability in a business organization. The Giving Voice to Values (GVV) program offers an action-based curriculum where students develop the strategies and scripts for sustainability leadership. In this chapter, I discuss the advantages and applications of using GVV in teaching sustainability in business contexts. First, GVV complements a variety of course designs and theoretical frameworks. Second, GVV addresses the ambiguity surrounding sustainability by identifying shared values across the organization and individuals. Third, GVV fosters a sense of self-efficacy in leading for sustainability, rooted in each individual's past experience and supported through peer coaching. Fourth, GVV provides practical strategies for change agency that address common sustainability challenges. Throughout this chapter, I will illustrate these advantages with specific exercises from the GVV curriculum, and offer suggestions for integrating additional resources from the sustainable business literature. Advantages of the GVV approach in teaching sustainability leadership. VV complements a variety of course designs and theoretical frameworks. Faculty teaching sustainability in business may come from diverse disciplines, utilize different frameworks, and teach within various course designs. The GVV approach can be adapted to this range of expertise, models, and courses. Within business schools, an entire course may be dedicated to sustainable business, or sustainability may be integrated within other courses, such as business ethics, business and society, supply chain, marketing, organizational behavior, and change management. The GVV curriculum can be used in both approaches. By design, the GVV exercises and cases can be sequenced for multiple sessions or be singled out for a specific session. For example, a course on sustainable business may utilize a mix of cases, pulled from the GVV curriculum and from other sources. Regardless of the case source, GVV offers the action-based reasons and rationalizations 3 framework for case analysis, in which the conversation moves from analysis to action, extending the emphasis from not only what should be done, but also the specific steps and conversations that must occur for change to occur. The emphasis on planning behavior and rehearsal for action within the course context is a particular strength of GVV, in terms of both flexibility and transferability. For example, GVV does not explicitly adopt one definition of sustainability, or a specific model, such as triple bottom line, natural step, living principles for design. However, GVV does offer a framework for how one understands and acts from one's values. Thus, faculty can use the sustainability framework that best fits with their discipline, industry context, and course design, then utilize GVV to emphasize how the values of that particular framework can be practiced in leading change within the case scenarios and organizational contexts. The strategies for leading change for sustainability can be transferred to leading change in other contexts as well. For example, the importance of engaging allies, focusing on small steps of change, seeking win opportunities, and finding shared values that are consistent with the organization's mission are effective strategies for leading change for sustainability, as well as other change initiatives. GVV uses the language of shared values as opposed to the language of sustainability. In teaching sustainability, one begins with several challenges. First, the very term sustainability is ambiguous, evoking a mix of concepts and values to different people. This is particularly true in organizations where sustainability can be seen as a new trend to the boomer generation, while the millennial generation has grown up with the concept of sustainability both in their education and in the marketplace. For second, sustainability requires a long-term perspective of value creation, while short-term thinking focused on quarterly earnings often drives business decisions. Lastly, sustainability can strike many as value-laden, and thus the term may suggest normative and ethical implications. Such explicit or even implicit suggestions can be perceived as imposing one's values and may trigger a defensive response, depending on how the proposed initiative resonates, or does not, with one's own values as well as those of the organization. One might be tempted to address these challenges directly, either by explicitly clarifying the concept of sustainability or by building the business case for sustainability. Indeed, this is the strategy used in many textbooks and articles, and the educational context is an ideal place for discussing such ideas. Yet in the workplace, one often does not have the time to educate their coworkers or their managers about the meaning of sustainability. For example, sustainability is often associated with going green and the practices of conserving resources and reducing waste. While these are included in the concept of sustainability, this definition is narrow, focused primarily on environmental sustainability. Such a mental schema may not intuitively include the ideas of economic sustainability or social sustainability. If the very word sustainability runs the risk of confusion at best and intuitive resistance at worst, then avoiding the term may be advantageous. This is the strategy used by sustainability business thinker and entrepreneur Amory Lovins. When asked in an interview with MIT Sloan Management Review, when audiences of organization leaders ask what you mean by sustainability, what do you tell them? He replied, "The question wouldn't arise because I don't use the word sustainability means so many things to so many people that it's pretty useless. There are various standard definitions you can quote, Brundtland, Forum for the Future, etc., but none is generally accepted." But behind your question is the core of something very important. The idea that doing business as if nature and people were properly valued actually creates stunning competitive advantage. To put it another way, if capitalism is a productive use of and reinvestment in capital, we can't deal only with financial and physical capital, money and goods. We also need to productively use and reinvest in the two more valuable kinds of capital, people and nature. 5. This response may be surprising from the author of Natural Capitalism 6 and the founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute, yet, Lovins recognizes the importance of finding common values that resonate with his audience. He understands that organizations may have limited knowledge and experience with sustainability, and thus the language of sustainability is likely to fall on deaf ears. Instead, Lovins embraces the language of his audience and reframes the conversation around a shared business value, the productive use of and reinvestment of capital, with the ultimate goal of strategic competitive advantage for the business. Lovins' approach is consistent with how Gentile speaks of values. While not ignoring the differences that exist across individuals, ideologies, and cultures, she emphasizes that we can find common ground when it comes to values and motivations, accepting this premise that is, the existence of a short list of shared values and, therefore, the possibility of shared goals enables us to both prioritize our differences and also to frame the most important ones in ways that are more likely to communicate and resonate with different audiences. 7. To illustrate the idea of focusing on shared values, I have my students read Gentile's chapter on Values 8 in conjunction with Porter and Kramer's article Creating Shared Value. 9. Gentile offers the individual perspective, highlighting the opportunity to find common values across cultures and contexts. Porter and Kramer offer the organizational perspective, highlighting the opportunity for business to create shared value across economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Applying these ideas to sustainable business shifts the focus from definitions and frameworks to identifying shared goals for both individuals and the organization. In essence, one aligns sustainability with the strategy of the organization and with the values of the individuals working within the organization. The fundamental stance we are taking in the Giving Voice to Values approach is one of alignment, of moving with our highest aspirations and our deepest sense of who we wish to be, rather than a stance of coercion and stern judgment, or of moving against our inclinations. 10. GVV builds self-efficacy that is rooted in past experience and personal strengths, and enhanced through peer coaching. When it comes to leading for sustainability in one's own organization, students may hesitate, thinking that they lack previous experience in leading sustainability initiatives, or fearing that their organizations will resist such changes as too costly or time-consuming. Faculty can point to success stories of other leaders who have changed organizations. GVV suggests that students begin by examining their past experiences in leading from their values. This approach is rooted in the second assumption of GVV: I have voiced my values, at some points in my past. 11. The Tale of Two Stories 12 offers an exercise for such reflection, where students examine those instances where they have experienced a values conflict, and recall an episode where they voiced their values and one where they did not. In teaching sustainability leadership, I adapt the Tale of Two Stories exercise so that the question focuses on episodes of leading change. Describe a time in your work experience when you voiced your values to effectively lead change within your organization. Describe a time when you missed an opportunity to voice your values and lead change within your organization. If working with a group of managers experienced in sustainability, one can be more specific. Describe a time in your career when you voiced your values and effectively led change within your organization in the areas of sustainability or social impact. The essence of this exercise emerges in a closer examination of the episodes, where individuals explore their own motivations and rationalizations, what motivated you to lead or not lead change within your organization, as well as the conditions that enabled or disabled their change leadership. Identify the conditions in the situation that made it easier or more difficult to lead change. The goal is to identify the enablers within oneself and in organizational contexts that facilitate leading from one's values, as well as the disablers that weaken one's own resolve or pose organizational obstacles. As students reflect on these contrasting experiences, and as they share their stories with others, they see patterns in their own behavior, identify common organizational challenges, and uncover practical strategies for leading change in the face of such challenges. Students often are surprised to discover they have influenced change in their past. They see their own personal style in voicing their values, and the situations where this style is more and less effective. Hearing the stories of the peers is both inspiring and illuminating, for they see the range of styles and strategies used by others within various organizational contexts. This exercise lays an essential foundation for future case discussions. The sharing of stories has, in effect, shown that voicing values is not only possible, but is normal, and has revealed specific strategies that have been effective in a variety of contexts. Faculty can reference these lessons throughout the course, reminding students of their own experiences in voicing values. Within the context of sustainability, this exercise also enhances the competence necessary for change agency. In my teaching, I explicitly refer to Bandura's concept of self-efficacy. 13. As students revisit their past experiences in voicing their values, they develop a sense of self-efficacy to counteract the limited power one feels within organizations. Having this foundation of self-efficacy is essential for future success. As Bandura describes, perceived self-efficacy concerns people's beliefs in their capabilities to mobilize the motivation, cognitive resources, and courses of action needed to exercise control over events in their lives. There is a difference between possessing skills and being able to use them well and consistently under difficult circumstances. To be successful, one not only must possess the required skills, but also a resilient self-belief in one's capabilities to exercise control over events to accomplish desired goals. 14. Gentile describes this process as finding one's voice, where, through reflection on the past, practice for the future, and coaching from one's peers, one develops the skills and competence for future scenarios of challenge. The Tale of Two Stories exercise emphasizes two of the sources for increasing one's sense of efficacy: mastery experiences and modeling. Mastery experiences are not simply those episodes where one effectively met a particular challenge, but achievements that came through sustained efforts. If people experience only easy successes, they come to expect quick results and are easily discouraged by failure. To gain a resilient sense of efficacy, people must have experience in overcoming obstacles through perseverant effort. 15. Such resiliency is essential for change leaders, particularly when one considers the commitment required for systems change in organizations. Modeling offers the advantage of conveying to observers effective strategies for managing different situations. 16. Hearing the change stories of fellow students is only one way GVV incorporates modeling. Gentile also offers guidelines for peer coaching 17, where students can offer critical feedback on the proposed scripts for voicing one's values. These conversations, either facilitated by faculty or convened in small student groups, strengthen the individual's own style and expand the strategies available for effective problem solving. GVV provides a pragmatic framework of stakeholder analysis and action planning in preparation for the common obstacles to sustainable practices in organizations. Increasing self-efficacy is an important first step, yet further mastery and modeling are needed to lead change for sustainability. Students need to anticipate the common challenges one will face when advocating for sustainability, such as increased costs, the challenges of implementation to replace existing systems and practices, and the simple resistance that arises when any change is proposed. As faculty integrate cases into their courses, they can apply GVV's reasons and rationalizations framework. 18. A pragmatic approach to case analysis that deepens stakeholder thinking, anticipates obstacles, and focuses on individual action planning. In teaching sustainability, I apply this approach to the following case. 19. From the GVV curriculum, Felipe Montes is the newly hired purchasing director and product designer for a Spanish electronics company. Based on his previous experience in purchasing, Felipe suggested the company cut out their distributor in Hong Kong and work directly with the factories in South China. This change was implemented, and in turn eliminated the distributor's markup, which was sometimes as high as 30%. In the 27-year history of the company, no one had ever visited the factories until Felipe's visit. While some of the factories were clean and organized, the main factory that supplied his company's goods prompted multiple concerns for Felipe. Young girls worked long hours without magnifying glasses, the factory lacked air conditioning, some workers regularly inhaled gases from melted lead, and the housing for workers lacked windows as well as running water. While the factory in question was prized for its speed and quality of products, the social and environmental conditions were unacceptable. What should Felipe say and do next? Faculty may note that this scenario differs from sustainability cases that emphasize the organizational point of view or describe how a company has effectively made the shift to sustainable practice. Rather, students find themselves in the middle of a change scenario, one where there are both immediate opportunities for impact as well as the need for systemic change in both an organization and an industry. Providing this change context expands how students think of voicing their values. When faculty bring the GVV approach to their courses, students focus on what they are going to say in the immediate situation, to the individual or individuals right in front of them. As Gentile notes, however, voicing our values is not simply about what we say in one particular moment, but how we can lead and act over time, in a variety of situations, with a range of audiences. To emphasize the long view of change leadership, I have developed a change agent approach for GVV, as described in these presentation guidelines for my student teams. When you think of giving voice to your values, you may think about what you are going to say in this situation right in front of you. Often the current situation has deeply rooted causes that extend beyond the present challenge. In such cases, raising your voice is not only about what you say in the short term to address immediate concerns, but it is about developing a long-term strategy that will address the deeper issues. This week, we want to practice voicing our values to foster real and sustainable change. In other words, we want to explore how you become a change agent, from your initial actions, how you first speak up, to your future actions, how you will continue to voice your values in future conversations and actions. In your presentation, you are advising Felipe Montes on how he can become a change agent by giving voice to his values in both the short and long term. You will need to present him, and our class, with 1. A script of the most powerful and persuasive response he should vocalize in the short term. 2. A strategic plan of actions for following up on this first response that will lead to deeper and systemic change. In preparing the case, the student team applies the reasons and rationalizations framework, first identifying the mix of arguments that Felipe will need to address, both in his own mind and with key stakeholders. Students tend to easily identify the disablers, the potential increase in cost and timeliness of production, the well-established nature of the factory practices, the suggestion that factory conditions offer a higher quality of work than other labor opportunities in the area. The enablers are more difficult to see, considering the scope of such a challenge and the established practices of both the organization and the industry. To prompt solutions, we return to the strategies that have emerged throughout the course, including the tale of two stories reflection and other case discussions. We also revisit the enabler's 20 Gentile offers in her text, and focus on those strategies suited for sustainability change, playing to one's strengths. Students often overlook the credibility Felipe has in this scenario. Soon after joining the company, he became a positive change agent, immediately saving the company significant costs by eliminating the distributor and the associated markup costs. What strategies did he use in getting this proposal approved, and how might he use a similar approach in the current situation? Also, how might he use this early success as leverage in proposing changes in factory conditions? Incremental steps. In developing their response, students see immediate opportunities for impact, such as magnifying glasses and sterile masks. Felipe's boss indicated that he is open to these changes, and these changes may be important incremental steps or early wins that will build momentum for other changes. For example, the magnifying glasses may improve production quality and speed. If so, these positive results can be used in conversations with the factory manager, his own supervisor, and the other companies who use the factory to advocate for additional investments that enhance working conditions and efficiency of production. Engaging allies. The more challenging issues, such as the working conditions in the factory and the living conditions of the workers, require a significant commitment of leadership and resources from his organization, the cooperation of the factory manager, and support from other factory clients. Felipe can focus on building relationships with these decision-makers. He sees that is the heart of educating for values-driven leadership. If it helped, a quick subscribe keeps more summaries coming. So how do values and business connect? That is exactly where we started. Go back to the top and watch it click into place.